1969 was a turning point in world history. While humankind was taking its first steps on the moon, massive crowds were gathering at Woodstock to celebrate music and freedom, and the shocking murders carried out by Charles Manson's cult were shaking the United States. Another, quieter revolution was happening in the world of bodybuilding. On September 13th of that year, the Brooklyn Academy of Music in New York City would become the stage for the event that kicked off the modern era of the sport, the 1969 Mr. Olympia. This was the 5th edition of the IFBB's Ultimate Showdown, the International Federation of Bodybuilding, founded by the legendary brothers Joe and Ben Weider. Created to crown the greatest physique on the planet, Mr. Olympia had already earned the reputation of being every professional athlete's dream. But after the unusual 1968 event, when Sergio Oliva took the title without facing a single opponent, the championship needed to bring back its spark and prove it was a real competition. New York was buzzing with anticipation. The packed auditorium wasn't just there for massive muscles. They wanted to witness the thrill of a true showdown. It felt like everyone in the room knew they were about to see something epic, the kind of moment that would be written into the sport's history. The energy was electric. Photographers lined up their shots, fans waved homemade signs, and camera flashes lit up every corner backstage. Bodybuilding itself was in a transitional phase. Until then, it was seen mostly as a niche curiosity, something you'd find in the pages of specialized magazines or on small theater stages. But by 1969, the sport was beginning to shape its modern identity, a mix of spectacle, fierce rivalry, and extreme dedication. It was the birth of a new era that blended entertainment with serious athletic discipline. For those following closely, one question dominated the conversation. After the no-contest Olympia of 1968, who could possibly challenge Sergio Oliva, the feared myth? His presence on stage felt larger than life, and people wondered if anyone could finally threaten his throne. Simply announcing that he would compete was enough to sell out a venue. Outside the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the atmosphere was just as intense. Fans, curious onlookers, and die-hard bodybuilding enthusiasts crowded around the entrance, swapping predictions about who would win. Would we witness the rise of a new legend, or would Oliva's reign remain untouchable? The audience wasn't just waiting for a show, they were there for a historic moment. This opening chapter explains why Mr. Olympia 1969 is still remembered as the contest that changed everything. Set against a decade of cultural upheaval and a sport still searching for its identity, that September event was about to write an unforgettable page in bodybuilding history. To truly understand the impact of the 1969 Olympia, you need to know the story of the man who turned bodybuilding into a global spectacle, Joe Weider. Along with his brother Ben, he dreamed of creating a federation that would dominate the worldwide scene. That dream became the IFBB, the International Federation of Bodybuilding, which, in the 1960s, was still in its early steps, fighting for recognition and respect. Their mission was clear: to dethrone the long-standing champions of the AAU and NABA, which at the time were considered the gold standard of the sport. Back then, NABA events, especially the Pro Mr. Universe, were still the holy grail for bodybuilders. They had bigger crowds, more competitors, and a well-established history. The IFBB had to prove it could offer something truly unique. Joe Weider knew that just running similar competitions wouldn't cut it. He needed a title that would become the ultimate crown in the bodybuilding world. That's how Mr. Olympia was born in 1965. The idea was bold but simple. Bring together the best professional bodybuilders on the planet and crown the man with the greatest physique in the world. Unlike other contests, which often served as stepping stones to fame, the Olympia was meant to be the summit of a career. Winning it meant becoming part of history, a living legend. But the road wasn't easy. In its early years, the contest struggled with low participation. The audience was starting to grow, and the niche bodybuilding magazines covered it with excitement. But without enough competitors, it was hard to create the rivalries that kept fans on the edge of their seats. A perfect example was the 1968 Mr. Olympia, when Sergio Oliva stepped on stage completely alone, winning by default. It was an undisputed victory, but it also highlighted the need for real competition to keep the event alive. Joe Weider, relentless in his vision, doubled down on magazines, advertisements, and the promotion of new talent. He understood that bodybuilding couldn't just be about brute strength and muscle mass. It had to be a show. He turned athletes into stars by telling their stories, showcasing their routines, and building rivalries that fired up the audience. This was the start of a new era, where the sport began to live not only on the stage, but also in the media spotlight. Sergio Oliva's reign in 1967 and 1968, as impressive as it was, started creating a problem for the organizers. Fans admired the myth, but the lack of real competition was putting the championship at risk. Without tension, without a true showdown, Mr. Olympia could lose its magic. They desperately needed someone who could challenge the Cuban powerhouse and turn the stage into a real battlefield. By the late 1960s, whenever anyone mentioned bodybuilding, one name dominated the conversation: Sergio Oliva, known worldwide as the Myth. And that nickname wasn't just hype. His physique looked like it broke the rules of reality, almost impossible to believe. Standing about 5 feet 10 inches, 1.78 meters, and weighing roughly 240 pounds, 110 kilograms, of dense, hard muscle, Sergio had massive arms, shoulders like mountain peaks, and a razor-thin waist that formed the classic V-taper. When he walked on stage, it was like physical perfection had come to life. Oliva's story was just as remarkable as his body. A Cuban immigrant, he came to the United States chasing a better life and found the perfect place to turn his body into a work of art in Chicago. By day, he worked as a butcher. By night, he spent hours grinding it out at the legendary Duncan YMCA gym, chiseling every muscle with relentless discipline and focus. That life of sacrifice and dedication turned him into more than just an athlete. He became a living inspiration to anyone who believed hard work could change your destiny. When Sergio captured the Mr. Olympia title in 1967, he instantly went from competitor to living legend. And when he repeated the feat in 1968, at an event where no one even dared step on stage against him, he solidified himself as the man to beat. That walkover victory only strengthened his aura of invincibility, but it also left a lingering question. Was there anyone on Earth capable of truly challenging him? What made Oliva so special was the rare combination of massive muscle volume and beautiful aesthetics. He had arms that looked like they were forged from steel, a massive chest, wide lats, and legs like concrete pillars. But his ultra-tight waist created proportions that hypnotized the audience. Every pose was a masterclass in visual impact. Every movement on stage reminded everyone why he was called the Myth. By 1969, Sergio stepped into Mr. Olympia more confident and prepared than ever. His training was at its peak, and he knew that staying on top meant defeating not just his opponents, but himself. He understood that the fans wanted a show, and he was ready to deliver. At the same time, he knew this year would be different. For the first time, a real challenger had emerged, and his throne was about to be tested. For the audience, seeing Sergio Oliva live was unforgettable. His stage presence was magnetic, a mix of charisma and sheer dominance. Every smile, wave, and little bit of playful showmanship drew the crowd in instantly. Each pose felt like a statement. I'm the best in the world, and you're here to witness it. But behind the confidence and the stage lights, Sergio knew that 1969 was a turning point. This Olympia would be the moment to prove that his reign wasn't a fluke, and that he was still the most jaw-dropping man on the planet. While Sergio ruled bodybuilding like a king, a new giant was rising in Europe, Arnold Schwarzenegger. At just 22 going on 23, standing 6 feet 2 inches, 1.88 meters, and weighing around 240 pounds, 110 kilograms, the Austrian already turned heads with his size and charisma. His physique was incredible, but his ambition was even bigger. For Arnold, being big wasn't enough. He wanted to be the biggest. And that meant dethroning Sergio Oliva on the Mr. Olympia stage. The young Austrian's recent history showed a meteoric rise. He was already a 2-time Mr. Universe in Europe and was starting to build international fame. But in 1968, he hit a major wake-up call when he competed at the IFBB Mr. Universe in Miami. Despite his gigantic frame, he lost to Frank Zane, whose smaller but razor-sharp, aesthetic physique stole the win. That defeat was a shock that completely changed Arnold's approach to the sport. Determined to turn weakness into strength, Arnold accepted Joe Weider's invitation, signed the contract, and moved to California, the epicenter of modern bodybuilding. Surrounded by the best athletes of the era, he entered a phase of intense evolution. By 1969, his physique was completely transformed, more proportional, sharper, more symmetrical, and with that golden tan that would wow not just the judges, but also the crowd that would pack the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Beyond the physical transformation, Arnold carried a natural charisma and a confidence that bordered on theatrical. He loved teasing his rivals and knew the crowd lived for the show. Joe Weider saw this star quality and promoted him as the future of bodybuilding, crafting the perfect storyline, the young European giant coming to America to challenge the undefeated myth. This narrative fired up curiosity and skyrocketed expectations for the 1969 Mr. Olympia. For Arnold, the goal was crystal clear: take Sergio Oliva's throne. He didn't see the Cuban as just a champion. He was the wall standing between Arnold's name and sports immortality. Every training session, every meal, every pose backstage was fueled by his obsession to prove he was the new king of the bodybuilding world. The fans, meanwhile, were ecstatic over this fresh rivalry. On one side, the reigning champion with his superhuman physique and hypnotic stage presence. On the other, the young challenger, taller, charismatic, and brimming with swagger. Everything was set for a clash that promised to redefine the sport. Arnold's move to the US and his preparation to face Sergio Oliva didn't just create a historic duel. They also marked the start of a legend. The stage was set for a showdown that would make the 1969 Mr. Olympia one of the most legendary moments in bodybuilding history. But Mr. Olympia 1969 didn't stand alone. It was part of a true bodybuilding festival, turning the Brooklyn Academy of Music into a temple of muscle and performance. On that September 13th, the packed crowd wasn't just there for the epic battle between Sergio Oliva and Arnold Schwarzenegger. They were there for a whole lineup of contests celebrating the sport in every category. This packed schedule created a wave of excitement, making every moment of the event unforgettable. The night kicked off with the 1969 IFBB Mr. America, a classic competition showcasing the best amateur bodybuilding talent in the U.S. Athletes were divided by height, and each performance drew roaring applause from the audience. It was like the crowd was warming up its heart before the main event. In the short class, the champion was Warren Frederick, who shocked everyone with his insane muscle density. Despite his shorter frame, his physique looked ahead of its time, thick, detailed, and showing the kind of cuts that would define the sport in the coming decades. The crowd went wild, recognizing the potential in his carefully sculpted body. The medium class was dominated by John DeCola, whose calling card was perfect balance and proportion across all muscle groups. He had been the runner-up the previous year, losing to Frank Zane, and he walked on stage with the confidence of a man who knew his time had come. With flawless symmetry, he not only claimed his class, but also took the overall Mr. America title, making him one of the most talked-about names of the event. In the tall class, the spotlight belonged to Don Peters, a fan favorite who combined an impressive physique with natural charisma. His stage presence instantly won over the crowd. With well-shaped muscles and a movie star look, Don proved that bodybuilding could captivate audiences not just through sheer size, but also through personality and connection. The festival rolled on with the 1969 IFBB Mr. Universe, bringing international competitors and raising the bar even higher. In the short class, the winner was Franco Columbu, Arnold Schwarzenegger's best friend and training partner. His physique was dense, compact, and shockingly muscular, drawing attention for its raw power and sharp definition. In the medium class, Rick Wayne stole the show with his iconic arms, detailed abs, and posing skills that had the crowd screaming in admiration. The tall class, and the overall title, went to none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger, who crushed the competition with his unique blend of size, proportion, and commanding stage presence. On top of winning his class and the main title, Arnold also walked away with awards for Best Arms, Best Chest, Best Back, and Best Legs, confirming he was in the best shape of his life. Franco Columbu earned Best Abs and the Most Muscular award, while Rick Wayne took Best Poser, reinforcing the sport's artistic side. These early competitions worked like emotional warm-ups for the crowd. Every athlete who stepped on stage built anticipation for the final showdown between Sergio Oliva and Arnold Schwarzenegger. The auditorium was electric, and every win in the smaller categories felt like a prelude to the main event. The atmosphere was pure adrenaline, perfectly primed for the chapter everyone had been waiting for, the battle that would change the history of bodybuilding. The most anticipated moment of the night had finally arrived. After all the warm-up contests, the stage at the Brooklyn Academy of Music was ready to welcome the only two men who would make history: Sergio Oliva, the reigning champion, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, the young challenger promising to steal the throne. The tension was electrifying. Over 2,100 people packed the auditorium, and most of them were screaming for Sergio, the living myth of bodybuilding. The energy in the venue was indescribable. Photographers crouched at the edge of the stage, journalists flipped open their notepads, and fans roared their heroes' names. With every passing minute, the noise swelled. For many in the room, this wasn't just another contest. It was shaping up to be the greatest showdown in bodybuilding history. Deep down, everyone knew they were witnessing the transition from one era to the next. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the first to step on stage. The Austrian walked with unshakable confidence, showing off the body he had carved with relentless focus over the past year. His physique was symmetrical, sharply defined, and perfectly tanned, proof of the lessons learned in California. He kicked off his routine with the poses that would become his signature: the front double biceps, showing off his massive arms and full chest; the three-quarter back pose, highlighting his wide, detailed lats; and the side chest, which brought roaring applause from the crowd. Even though most of the audience was rooting for Sergio, they couldn't help but be impressed. Arnold had clearly transformed. His muscles were more polished, and every pose radiated confidence and stage presence. The young giant was letting the world know he wasn't there just to compete. He was there to challenge the unbeatable champion head-on. Then, Sergio Oliva took the stage, and the auditorium exploded with cheers and applause. The Cuban showman knew exactly how to win over a crowd, entering with playful confidence, smiling, teasing, and connecting with his fans. His body looked even bigger than in 1968, with proportions that almost didn't seem real. His wide shoulders, narrow waist, and massive arms formed that iconic V-taper silhouette that would inspire generations to come. Sergio didn't just pose, he performed. Every movement was calculated to hypnotize the audience. When he raised his arms into his legendary victory pose, the crowd went wild. His routine was the perfect mix of charisma and dominance, as if he was silently declaring, "I'm the king of this stage, and I'm here to prove it again." The contrast between the two men was mesmerizing. On one side, Arnold, young, towering, and symmetrical, representing the future of the sport. On the other, Sergio, the absolute myth, with a physique that defied human limits and a presence that owned the stage. The audience knew they were witnessing a legendary confrontation. Every cheer, every scream, only added to the tension. It was clear, the 1969 Mr. Olympia wasn't just a contest. It was a spectacle destined to be remembered forever. A tense silence fell over the hall as the individual routines ended. The judges were torn. Sergio Oliva had shown his usual dominance, while Arnold Schwarzenegger impressed with flawless definition and proportion. For the audience, it felt impossible to pick a winner. Then, a historic decision was made. The two competitors would be called to the stage together for a pose-for-pose showdown. At that moment, the very first posedown in bodybuilding history was born. When the two giants stood side by side, the arena erupted into chaos. Every movement drew deafening cheers. Arnold opened the duel with his front double biceps, arms high and full, while Sergio answered with his legendary victory pose, arms spread wide in that perfect V, showing the world why they called him the myth. It was like watching two superheroes go to war, each one trying to prove he was the rightful king of the stage. The next moment was even more electrifying. Both men hit a side chest pose at the same time, and the auditorium nearly exploded. The crowd reacted as if they were watching a championship final. Muscles flexed to their limits, faces tight with effort, every detail of their physiques on full display. For those few minutes, the stage became a living demonstration of pure rivalry and passion for the sport. The posedown wasn't just about aesthetics, It was psychological warfare. Arnold smiled with confidence, locking eyes with Sergio at every transition. Sergio, in return, stayed calm and charismatic, as if silently saying, "This is still my throne." The atmosphere was surreal. The crowd's deafening cheers, the camera flashes, and the heavy breathing of the athletes all came together to create a moment that would be remembered for decades. After a few minutes of pure intensity, the judges finally reached their decision. Sergio Oliva was announced as the champion for the third straight year, taking home the $1,000 prize and cementing his place as a living legend in bodybuilding. But the runner-up wasn't overshadowed. Arnold Schwarzenegger claimed second place, marking the only loss of his entire Mr. Olympia career. The most sportsmanlike moment of the night happened right after the announcement. Even though he was disappointed, Arnold sincerely hugged Sergio and even kissed him on the cheek, acknowledging his superiority that day. Deep down, though, Arnold knew he'd be back stronger. That scene captured not just a victory, but the birth of a rivalry that would define the sport forever. With that posedown, bodybuilding entered a new era. The crowd realized they weren't just watching muscle. They were witnessing a battle of titans, combining charisma, skill, and pure showmanship. The 1969 Mr. Olympia wasn't just another bodybuilding contest. It became a turning point in the sport's history. On that Brooklyn stage, modern bodybuilding was truly born. For the first time, fans experienced a competition with real tension, drama, and excitement from start to finish. From that day forward, direct comparisons and posedowns became essential to judging, transforming every championship into an unforgettable experience for the audience. For the sport, that September marked the beginning of a new era. Mr. Olympia was no longer just another tournament. It was solidified as bodybuilding's ultimate event, the crown jewel that every athlete dreamed of winning. What had once been a niche competition began drawing media attention and winning over new fans, paving the way for bodybuilding's rise in the decades to come. For Sergio Oliva, 1969 was both the peak and the closing chapter of his reign. With his third consecutive title, he reinforced his image as the myth, the man who seemed impossible to beat. His legendary V-taper, his charisma, and his commanding stage presence became eternal symbols of bodybuilding's golden era. On the other side of that story, Arnold Schwarzenegger turned a single defeat into the fuel for his future dominance. It was the only time he ever lost on the Mr. Olympia stage, but it also marked the beginning of his rise. Arnold left that auditorium with one certainty: he would return stronger. And he did, launching a legendary streak of 7 consecutive titles that would make him the most iconic bodybuilder of all time. For Joe Weider and the IFBB, the 1969 event was the culmination of years of effort. After early Olympias with few competitors and limited interest, the show had finally become the spectacle they always envisioned. Sergio and Arnold standing side by side, the roaring crowd, and the coverage in the bodybuilding magazines all cemented Mr. Olympia as the center of the bodybuilding world. The legacy of that night still echoes today. The image of Sergio raising his trophy while Arnold hugged him with a determined smile represents more than a single victory. It symbolizes a passing of the torch, the meeting of a myth at his peak and a legend in the making. It proved that bodybuilding isn't just about muscle. It's about stories, rivalries, and moments that live forever in the hearts of fans. And that's how we close another unforgettable chapter in bodybuilding history. The 1969 Mr. Olympia wasn't just a contest. It was the moment when legends met and a new era was born. Sergio Oliva, with his unmatched presence and charisma, solidified his legacy as the myth, while Arnold Schwarzenegger, even in defeat, took his first step toward becoming the greatest champion of all time. Stories like this remind us that bodybuilding goes far beyond muscle. It's about challenges, perseverance, and moments that inspire generations. Now we want to hear from you. Which of these giants impressed you the most on that legendary stage? Do you think Sergio truly deserved the three-peat, or was Arnold already showing signs that he would become unstoppable in the years to come? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of Mr. Olympia, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more bodybuilding fans around the world. And if you're not part of our community yet, Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next deep dive into another incredible story from the sport. Thanks for watching and for being part of this community that keeps the passion for classic bodybuilding alive. We'll see you in the next video. And until then, keep finding inspiration in the legends who turned muscle into history.